Hello, honeys, and welcome back. I hope all of you had a great Mother's Day, got to spend some time with your families. We are already on, I think, episode 14 of the Beesness this year. Crazy how time flies. But I've got a whole curated lineup of headlines for you today, so let's get started. LA museums made the announcement of their upcoming temperature changes. Several museums across the city are breaking from the standard narrow ranges of temperatures typically allowed within galleries and are planning instead to allow for a wider range of indoor climates. This decision is part of the Climate Impact Program led by LHL Consulting and launched through PST Art, formerly known as Pacific Standard Time. The program encourages art institutions to lower their carbon footprints and preserve energy. The LA Times explains that keeping museums cool as a method of protecting artwork is a major energy guzzler, even though it's been proven that slightly warmer temperatures are not harmful to the works in many cases, particularly concerning far less fragile forms of contemporary art. The Hammer Museum will pilot the project with their PST art exhibition titled Breathe or Breath Toward Climate and Social Justice, which will open later this summer. Others planning to join in on the initiative include the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles, the Skirball Cultural Center, the Broad, the California African American Museum, and La Brea Tar Pits. Last week, Spain's Prado Museum also confirmed the rediscovery of a lost Caravaggio painting. Back in 2021, an auction of the painting held in Spain was stopped on the suspicion that this work may have been a Caravaggio, though it was at that point attributed to a disciple of the 17th century Spanish painter José de Ribera. The Spanish government put an export ban on the work after the museum alerted the government that it could be a Caravaggio. And on Monday, the Prado confirmed it is indeed a work by the Italian Baroque master. The painting's starting price tag of 1,500 euros, or about 1,600 US dollars, is laughable, shocking, considering that the value of an authentic Caravaggio would easily stretch into the tens of millions, if not more. The work in question, titled Ecce Homo, Latin for Behold the Man, by Michelangelo Merisi de Caravaggio, depicts the biblical passage of the Ecce Homo, in which Jesus Christ is presented to the crowds before being crucified. Though the work was known about as early as the 1600s, experts later lost track of it. This could be because of its pretty small size. It only measures 111 by 86 centimeters, or 44 by 34 inches. Ecce Homo will go on display from May 27th until October as a special one-piece exhibition following an agreement with its anonymous new owner and the Spanish government. After that, it will be moved to the Prado's permanent collection for another 4 months. This confirmation is, of course, a huge deal because of its monetary implications, but also, in the words of the Prado, quote, "Since its reappearance at an auction 3 years ago, Ecce Homo has represented one of the greatest discoveries in the history of art," end quote. That's because it is believed to have once been part of the private collection of Philip IV of Spain. And on top of that is one of only around 60 known works by Caravaggio in existence, thus one of the most valuable old master artworks in the world. The process of its so-called rediscovery is also an art historical marvel. One of the 4 identifying experts, Maria Cristina Terzaghi, was quoted as saying, "The speed of consensus around the work being a Caravaggio upon its rediscovery was absolutely unprecedented in the critical history of the painter, on whom scholars have rarely agreed, at least in the last 40 years, end quote. Finally, there's a legally fascinating part of this as well. The painting is now not allowed to leave Spain without government permission. We also learned in the last week that Donna Summer's disco-style outfits are set to go on display in an exhibition at the MFA. The Boston-born Disco Queen's pieces will form part of the exhibition titled Dress Up, which explores how jewelry and fashion can be powerful vehicles for self-expression. Summer herself was born LaDonna Adrienne Gaines on December 31st of 1948 and gained international fame at the height of the disco era in the 70s. The MFA curator behind the exhibition, Theo Tyson, expressed being particularly excited by a pre-fall 2010 Valentino dress to be included, and which Summer wore for a performance of Art on Ice in Switzerland in 2011. Of that dress and event, they explain that Art on Ice is a very prestigious gala and explains how cemented in her career she was, that she was a participant in it. Tyson first spotted Summer's garment at a Christie's auction house in 2023 and wisely ensured the museum acquired the dress plus 2 pairs of Summer's shoes after recognizing their potential for future exhibitions. He said, quote, "We're at the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, and Donna Summer is a Boston girl. Mission Hill is literally a stone's throw away from the museum, and it is our privilege and our honor to be able to invite this legacy into the museum by adding these pieces to our collection," end quote. Tyson also expressed hope that the hometown connections will drive up excitement for the show. We also received word that following a slew of pop-ups and standalone exhibits, the Banksy Museum is set to open on Canal Street in New York on May 15th. According to the official press release, the space will display over 160 works by the elusive England-based street artist. It will include street art, studio pieces, videos, and animated visuals. Time Out says it will, quote, "be the largest display of Banksy work ever seen in a single showing," end quote. Similar destinations by the same proprietor have already debuted in Barcelona, Brussels, Krakow, and Paris. All were projects by Hazis Vardar, better known as the brainchild behind the famous French Palace nightclub. However, there's a catch in the experience, a break between the goals and the reality here. Vardar's official statement says, quote, "street art belongs in the raw setting of the streets," end quote, but then goes on to justify his private events and showings by saying, quote, "but if people can't see it, is it even art? Little of Banksy's works are visible to the public at large. Most have been stolen for resale, inadvertently destroyed, or erased by overzealous city cleaning teams. Most of this transient art could only be viewed on tiny smartphone screens, which is no way to experience the scale or emotion of Banksy's work." A bit more importantly, however, some of what will be up for display won't actually be Banksy's own work, but quote-unquote celebratory recreations of his pieces, both the popular and the unfamiliar ones. Unfortunately, this comes off to me as a less than above-board operation. Last week, we also heard that Frank Stella, a trailblazing artist who pushed abstraction to its limits, has died at 87. Born in 1936 in Malden, Massachusetts, he had an early love for art because of his artsy mom. He later attended the Phillips Academy in Andover, along with peers and future stars such as Hollis Frampton and Carl Andre. The New York Times reported that he had been battling lymphoma, but lost on Saturday. Stella could have been an artist featured in our Color Works section of ATPPO, as many consider him a definer of the era with his black paintings of the late 1950s. Those Spartan paintings were made as a challenge to abstract expressionism, a very color-based movement, and were particularly off-putting to audiences because they were not intended to provide visual stimulation in any way. The artist once famously said of his own work to the minimalist sculptor Donald Judd, quote, "What you see is what you see," end quote. After that period, Stella's art only grew in scale. Stella will be remembered for this quite literally black sheep art, as well as his philosophies and some controversial personal opinions. In an article published shortly after Stella's death, Alex Greenberger in Art News says, quote, "Stella's gift to the world, at least early on, was his utter coldness. He made it possible to create art that inflicts pain upon his fans, and he showed that it was acceptable to find intellectual pleasure in being knocked down," end quote. I think this examination very much describes how satire is almost not a mean enough word to describe some of the moods of these black paintings. Greenberger goes on to write, quote, "As for me, I am drawn to Die van Hoek, even as I am repelled by it as a Jewish American. It taught me that you can love an artwork that does not necessarily love you back. Looking at Stella's early work hurts me. That's why I love it," end quote. Greenberger's reference to his identity in this analysis is relevant because the title of that 1959 artwork is a reference to a former Nazi chant. On Wednesday of last week, civil rights leader and mentor to Little Rock Nine, Daisy Bates, was honored with a statue at the U.S. Capitol. The late civil rights leader and journalist Bates was instrumental in desegregating Arkansas public schools in the 1950s, and she died in 1999 at the age of 84. Her newly installed likeness depicts Bates with a newspaper in one hand and a notebook and pen in the other, likely because Bates and her husband together published an Arkansas newspaper dedicated to the civil rights cause. She also served as the president of the Arkansas chapter of the NAACP. Bates's statue faces one of Rosa Parks at the end of Statuary Hall. And this installation further reflects a nationwide move to replace numerous monuments or images of racist past figures. According to Reuters, the breakers of this story, the U.S. Capitol allows each of the 50 states to choose 2 statues for the National Statuary Hall and surrounding prominent hallways. And in 2019, Arkansas's state legislature decided to replace both of its previous entries. Statues of Bates and the late singer Johnny Cash will replace ones of Uriah Rose, a mid-1800s Little Rock attorney who was a Confederate sympathizer and a founder of the American Bar Association, as well as James Clark, a late 1800s governor who later became a U.S. senator and was a fierce defender of white supremacy. In a follow-up from a previous Beesness story, the women's only exhibit at Tasmania's Museum of Old and New Art is set to become a toilet to keep men out. You may remember that back in April, the museum lost a gender discrimination suit filed by New South Wales resident Jason Lau regarding the barring of men from that space. The museum was disgruntled with this opinion at the time, arguing that the court took, quote, too narrow a view on women's historical and ongoing societal disadvantage, end quote, and how the ladies' lounge can, quote, promote equal opportunity, end quote. The new plan by artist Kirsha Kachele, announced on Tuesday, involves transforming the velvet-clad lounge into a women's toilet and a church. She believes that this transformation and categorization will allow it to continue operating as a women-only space under legal exemptions. Says Kachele in Australian media reports, quote, "There is a fabulous toilet coming to the ladies' lounge, and so in that sense the ladies' lounge will operate as a ladies' room. It's a toilet that is celebrated the world round. It is the greatest toilet, and men won't be allowed to see it," end quote. Some of Mona's key artworks will be moved into the museum's existing ladies' toilet to ensure uninterrupted viewing while the artist applies for other exemptions. Only on Sundays would men be allowed into the space to learn ironing and laundry folding. Caccielli went on to say that the lawsuit has been a blessing in disguise. Quote, thanks to the ruling, we have no choice but to open ourselves to a whole range of enriching experiences, spiritual, educational, to discover fascinating new possibilities and to become better, end quote. All right, honeys, that is all I have for you today, at least. There were honestly enough intriguing headlines this week to make 2 Beesnesses, but because we have a full-length drop coming in just a couple of days, maybe you'll get a surprise of a catch-up or a special extra Beesness in the next couple of weeks. Who knows? Anyways, take care of yourselves and talk soon. This podcast was created, produced, written, hosted, edited, and fact-checked by Master's graduate Celia Bugno. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe on all of your favorite streaming platforms as well as your social medias.